Such a pleasure to be joining you right here on the India Development Debate on ET Now. I'm Supriya Shrinate and straight on to the big debate this evening. And it, of course, is around the new man in charge, the new boss of Mint Street. In his first press conference within hours of taking over as RBI Governor, Shaktikanta Das's urgent mission was to open the channels of communication. Within hours after he took over, like I said, as the chief of RBI, the former Economic Affairs and the Finance Secretary struck a conciliatory note, refusing to be dragged into the tussle between the central bank on one hand and the central government on the other, which has led Urjit Patel's resignation. The signal is clear, no more firefighting and ambushes. From now on, consultation and outstanding issues will be the way forward. New Delhi's chosen man has also promised to make the central bank more accountable, as the government's top ministers had time and again laid the blame of NPMS at the central bank's doorstep, accusing it of being lax in its oversight. The new RBI Governor's test comes Friday, when he will chair the all-crucial board meet with a host of issues to dwell upon. RBI being a board-controlled institution and NBFC liquidity are primary amongst those issues. Will he tread the path of inflation-targeting policies? He also is emphasizing on growth, unlike his predecessors, a lot more. The appointment of a career bureaucrat as the RBI chief and how he plans to take the central bank forward while heeding the North Block's concerns on liquidity crisis is a big topic of discussion and debate right here on the India Development Debate this evening. Before we move any further, it's time to quickly recount and recollect what Governor Das did tell us earlier today.
Every institution, every institution has to have its professional integrity, maintain its professional autonomy. At the same time, every institution also must adhere to principles of accountability.
You are coming to RBI as the 25th governor under unprecedented circumstances. If I may ask you a very frank and a candid and maybe a little blunt question, the relationship between the central government and the central bank has hit rock bottom. Will your priority be to first fix that relationship before some of the issues that you've listed out? The channels of communication seemingly are blocked.
No, I don't know about, what is blocked and whether the relationship is not, not good, or I won't like to go into that. But as I mentioned, that we have to have stakeholder consultation. We'll have to have consultation with everybody. Government is ultimately the government has an, government is not just a stakeholder, but I mean the government of the day runs the economy, runs the country and manages major policy decisions. So that there has to be free, fair, objective and very frank discussion with between the government and the Reserve Bank of India. And I would like to believe that all issues, howsoever contentious, can be resolved through discussion.
News broken to you and by whom? So when was the news broken to you about coming to RBI and by whom? If you can answer that question, sir, it will be good.
Thank you.
All right, it's time to really put the spotlight to where it belongs and analyze the tenure of what Shaktikanta Das is up for. What does his appointment really mean at this stage, and how should one read his opening remarks as RBI Governor? And Maithili, I will come to you. And the one thing that I can tell you is it was refreshing to be at the RBI back when you were allowed to ask questions. The media was, welcome. We weren't seen as intruders. So in some sense, it was a good day. But joining us in the show, Professor T.T. Ram Mohan from IIM Ahmedabad, Hemendra Hazari, market expert, Prabal Basu Roy, management advisor and former corporate director, and of course, our consulting editor, Maithili Bhusturwat. So like I said, Maithili, it looked like the emergency was over at RBI and we were, finally welcome back. In some sense, before I go into the statements that he made, but the fact that he chose to speak to media and came prepared with a statement and took questions shortly after he took over as the governor of RBI, and I'm presuming that was not on his list of priorities, is he really emphasizing that the channels of communication are going to be open?
Well, yes, I would think so. It was a refreshing change, particularly from the previous governor. He was known for his reticence. The media conferences were very few, and the questions were few and far between. He used to pick and choose. So in contrast, I think Shaktikanta Das was willing to take as many questions as he could within the limited period of time, and the very fact that he chose to meet media almost immediately after taking over, it was a very refreshing change. So if earlier under the previous governor, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, he was one extreme of flamboyance and we had Urjit Patel at the other extreme of extreme reticence, we now have somebody who's somewhere in between and seems to be willing to talk. And communication, remember, was one of the biggest drawbacks under the previous tenure of the previous governor. So I think this would be a refreshing change. Mind you, he also came on his own. He wasn't flanked by his deputy governors, sending a message that here's a man who's approachable, who's willing to talk, and dialogue, communication, consensus building, that is the way to go forward, particularly in a democracy like ours.
Okay, very quickly, I'm going just request everybody to keep it very brief because I want to cover a lot of ground, and I will go across to Professor T.T. Ram Mohan. And you know, he came himself and proactively in his statement he spoke about, and if I may actually quote, because I took some copious notes thinking what on earth will he say, but he actually said it is I'm here to uphold the professionalism, the core values, the credibility and the autonomy of the RBI. Do you believe he was really addressing his detractors? He was addressing people who were suspicious about him being North Block's man here in Mumbai?
Well, he was stating the obvious, and he was trying to send out a reassuring message to the skeptics who think that the government has merely put somebody who can be, who will be suitably pliable and who will try to accommodate the government's wishes. But let me just quickly make the general point that I don't believe that any government or political party would want a weak and ineffective RBI governor or a weak and ineffective RBI. I think in a democracy, political parties understand that economic performance is crucial to winning or staying on in power, and they recognize the value of institutions such as RBI in promoting economic performance. So I think we have to give the politicians and political parties a little more credit than they normally get.
Couldn't agree more with you. I think they are our favorite punching bag, and sometimes we don't give them the credit that they deserve. But let me take this across to Hemendra Hazari. And Hemendra Hazari, even though when he said that, I am going to uphold all of these values, which is credibility, autonomy, independence, professionalism, in a response to my question specifically, he said, but there is accountability that is also required, and I am going to consult stakeholders, including the government, which is a stakeholder because the government of the day runs the economy and the country. Is he really putting his point across? I am not going to be a yes man. I am not going to be a pushover, but I am not unnecessarily also going to harp on independence by burning bridges with North Block. I mean, eventually, if I may quote Y.V. Reddy here, the autonomy, like Maithili keeps telling us, and rightly so, autonomy of the central bank is within the ambit of where the government wants it to be autonomous.
Very true, but I don't think you can expect anything otherwise. When a new governor comes, he's going to be, showing that he's a very balanced person. He's not going to favor either party. He's going to maintain good relations with the government, maintain the autonomy of the RBI. I would have been surprised if he had said anything to the contrary. Because unfortunately, today in the public media, there is a very deep chasm between the Reserve Bank of India and the government. And therefore, there is a deep question about his own credibility, and that's what he had to address, which he has done. But the point that the government has selected him, he's not a professional economist, he's not a monetary economist. He was the public face of demonetization, instrumental in its implementation, which was a gross disaster on this country. That you have selected such an individual who even, post his job, he was defending demonetization. So therein there is, in my opinion, very rightly an issue of credibility over his appointment. Now, we can only determine once we see what type of actions the Reserve Bank of India takes as him as governor. Then only will we know where he truly stands.
Just to be the devil's advocate, and I'm not here either defending him or attacking him, just to be the devil's advocate, and like somebody said yesterday, and rightly so, when you are a bureaucrat and a decision like that gets made, you may have your disagreements internally, but to an external world, you are going to defend that. Your point noted about defending it later on, he was member Finance Commission, but Prabal Basu Rao, I will come to you when he's striking a conciliatory note. Is Shaktikanta Das as Governor RBI what we need to give healing touch to a relationship between the central bank and the central government that really almost reached a point of no return. I mean, you know, we may not realize the import of what really happened. A central bank governor quit. That is how tensed issues became.
See, Supriya, you've hit it right on the head. See, he said all the right things, right? But that was expected, wasn't it? The problem is, however, much deeper in my mind than the identity of the person who actually occupies Mint Street. And it is so it's not about Shakti necessarily. It's not about him. It's about how we got to this situation. And that answers your question, because unless either the government or Urjit Patel actually come out with the real reasons and not nuanced niceties about why he resigned, everything we say will be speculative. And that is not necessarily the truth. But the important thing in public life is perception. And the perception, I repeat, perception. Why Urjit left is very well known in the events of the last few months. And it is that perception which damages the credibility of our institution, and a very hard-earned credibility, I would say, over the last 70 years of the institution. And to that extent, I think, you know, I've said this in an interview on Monday as well. I said the government needs to now sort of do this on a war footing to arrest this perception. And the only way it can do it is by appointing someone independent and credible, who is not an ex-bureaucrat and is not an ideologue. Unfortunately, Shakti, you know, by the fact that he's an ex-bureaucrat, comes with that baggage now. And he'll have to work extra hard to essentially show that the actions he takes.
But yeah. Prabal, I think the counter argument to that can very well be that there have been former bureaucrats who've served as RBI governors in absolutely, you know, fine capacity with fine fettle. I mean, look at Governor Subbarao or a Bimal Jalan or a Rangarajan. They all served in the government and then they moved to Mint Street. So, I mean, you know, why should we doubt the man? But Maitri, I want you to come in and, you know, I know you have a point of view there because I was speaking to Governor Subbarao yesterday. We had him on the channel and he said there are pluses and minuses of having an ex-bureaucrat. On the fact that on day one, and you know, for me that's important, because for the last 2.5 years, and I don't say this with malice, but for the last 2.5 years, it was difficult to get a question answered at the RBI, and these questions are not coming. And you know, I'm not going to benefit out of asking a question on RBI because I'm going to have the spotlight on myself for 15 seconds. It's important to ask questions which matter. Questions were being given to organizations who would turn around and say, I'll give it a pass. But people who would want to ask questions, people who wanted to question government action and the RBI's response, but not being given a chance to ask questions. And that is what I say. You cannot, you know, I think it was not a done deal. And in that sense, I welcome what happened today. But maybe I'm overreading into the situation. Maithili, would you want to respond to Prabal Basu Rao? I mean, being a bureaucrat doesn't make you an ideologue.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think one of the most successful governors that we had was Dr. Y.B. Reddy, who was a career bureaucrat. And in fact, he was perhaps single-handedly steered the country through the crisis after the global financial crisis. So much so that I think a very esteemed central banker overseas had said that if we had a governor like Dr. Y.B. Reddy, we might have escaped the crisis. So I think it's wrong to hold his lineage against him. And let's also not forget that when Raghuram Rajan had served in the IMF, but when he was appointed governor, nobody said he's going to carry out the mandate of the fund. Similarly, Urjit Patel served a number of years with Reliance Industries, but nobody said that he's going to carry out that he's going to be Reliance's man over there. Because let's not forget that once they are appointed with these positions, they perform as the head of the institution that they represent. And I don't agree with Prabal that the RBI's credibility is at stake. The RBI's credibility has been built up over a number of years. It is one of the most respected institutions. Yes, there have been lapses, of course. Any institution will have lapses, particularly in the case of supervision, regulation, both of banks and particularly of NBFCs. But the overall reputation is largely intact. So to say that just because he's a bureaucrat will necessarily taint the institution and him as well, I think is a little unfair.
Okay. I'm going to take it forward with Professor T.T. Ram Mohan and talk about specific issues. And one of those specific issues is banking. He said, I am meeting the heads of MDs and CEOs of public sector banks as early as tomorrow. In some sense, many will say he's hit the ground running. Is the list of priority right? You know, everything else, the contentious issues about liquidity and PC and all of that will follow with the board meetings. There is a committee that's already looked into it. The reserve is also going to be, looked at by the ECF committee. The reality is that as a governor or as a regulator, you've got to realize where the rot is, and the rot is in banks. And will you give him credit for the fact that his priority is to first look at the entities he's regulating, the public sector banks, and next will be private, he said?
Well, I think he sort of made it clear that he intends to have consultations with all stakeholders. And I think banks are certainly an important constituency that the RBI governor will be addressing. And so it's entirely appropriate that he is meeting bankers. But let me also make the general point that it has been the practice for RBI to have extensive shareholder consultations on all matters of policy. And I think by stakeholders, you also include the members of the RBI board. And one of the issues with the previous governor, I think, was that there was not adequate consultation with the RBI board on matters of importance. And one of the things I read in the media was that the February 12 circular about stressed assets was not discussed with the board, and perhaps it was not discussed with the government either. And so it's certainly a good sign that the new governor is sort of initiating the process of having extensive stakeholder consultations.
Consultations are important, at least for policy making. These are monetary managers. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact. I mean, of course, it will be a bad day if he is going to overly consult the board and the board starts taking decisions, because that also brings me to the point that if it is going to be a board governed institution, let's change the constitution of board. There is conflict of interest there. But before I move any further, I do want to touch upon one thing, and Hemendra, if I may come to you. Governors in the past, and RBI rightly so, is obsessed with inflation management. That is their mandate. You cannot, politicians across the political spectrum keep wanting RBI to cut rates. I don't think they can do that. Their mandate is price stability. The fact, though, that, Governor Das comes in and he reminds all of us and with us, our viewers, that the preamble of the RBI Act also talks about growth, and growth is an important thing. If I may actually quote him, he said, Indian economy is facing various challenges before the Indian economy, and there are factors that pose risks to growth. Do we read too much into it when we perhaps, I mean, my own sense is he hinting towards, at least opening the taps as far as liquidity for NBFCs is concerned?
See, obviously he's hinting at it, because very clearly from what we know from the media coverage, the government has wanted RBI to do the heavy lifting of the economy, which it refuses to do through increasing the fiscal deficit. And it wants the entire onus to be on RBI to provide liquidity, to lower interest rates. It has to be seen in that context. You see, if you really want to stimulate the Indian economy, you have to have a fiscal expansion as well as a monetary stimulus. But because of various reasons, the government refuses to really expand fiscal deficit, and therefore it wants RBI to do all the heavy lifting, and that's where the real pressure has come in. And I think the government may have been pressurizing the Reserve Bank of India to provide further liquidity, to lower interest rates, and as a stimulus to growth. So that, I think he's trying to just reaffirm that in the public domain, and that's what he has done. But has to be seen in this context, that the RBI alone cannot be given this responsibility of stimulating the Indian economy. The government has to do its bit by increasing the fiscal deficit.
A fair point indeed. But Prabal, I will ask you this question. I think Maithili referred to it, that the body language or the way he came in, he didn't walk in with 4 deputy governors and an ED, and the entire battalion didn't walk in. He came all by his own. I think his EA was there and the corporate communication head of the RBI was there. Those are the only people who walked in. He addressed a press conference, and eventually somebody did ask him that will Viral Acharya stay or go. Remember the deputy governor who many thought was the rebel rouser. His speech had created the tension. I frankly don't think so. But the question and the answer to that, I thought he didn't give an answer to this. He just said, I just had tea with Viral Acharya. He's very much here. How are you going to read into the dynamics within the RBI? Because whatever you may say, it wasn't as if Urjit Patel himself was against some of these issues. These were issues that the institution had resistance to, and the institution did not agree with. So in some sense, 4 deputy governors may not agree with an issue, and here's a man. How do you read the interpersonal dynamic that now has to be managed?
Of course. And before I answer this question, because it's related, I think before I was cut out on the last one, I think one thing I must say, I mean, for a moment, I'm not saying that people like Vimal Jalan or Rangachari have been, that is not the point here. The point was the context in which he was brought in, and he is an ex-bureaucrat. That was the context. And Shakti, remember, in terms of interpersonal, I personally know when he was in Tamil Nadu, he stood up against Jayalalitha on many issues and he was shunted out. So he has the ability to do what is required for the institution. The point is, will he be able to do it now? He'll be under intense scrutiny because of this situation. And therefore, his interpersonal relationship, the way he came in himself was essentially, I think, to make a fresh beginning. That is what he was trying to convey, that I am my own man and I will sort of, communicate directly, etc. I think that is what is important. But having said that, it is the institution which is larger than everybody, and like we have seen in the past, people who come into an institution, take on the characteristics of the institution, and that's where institutional stability comes in. So I'm hoping he will do that and not compromise on the RBI's institutional integrity part of it. So that was a good message, I think, coming on his own and sort of taking the questions. But today was preliminary. I mean, let's understand. Today was optics, right? I mean, that's fine. That's okay.
No, absolutely. Today was optics, but I also think it's important to manage these optics, because look at where the optics has taken the central bank and the central governor relationship. Sure. But very quickly, Maithili, if I may go ahead and ask you the other question, and I think that's actually, let me go across to Professor T.T. Ram Mohan. And Professor Ram Mohan, the question also is that, it was a very bitter parting of ways between the government and Urjit Patel. You now have a man who is appointed by this government as head of the RBI. Does the onus now also, I mean, there's going to be as much pressure on the central government also to mend relationship, because truth be told, Urjit Patel was their appointee. He was appointed by them. He was not appointed by the previous government, like this said about Raghuram Rajan. Urjit Patel was appointed by this government, and look at where matters came. And today, if they were to, run amok in this relationship, the pressure applies to the government, New Delhi, North Block, as much as it applies to the RBI. Or Shaktikanta Das.
Well, it can happen that heads of public institutions have serious differences with the political authority, and they choose to part company in consequence. So, but that should not be viewed as some big disaster. I'm a little struck by the fact that this whole sense of crisis or even looming national tragedy which has been created over the past several weeks seems to have been dispelled in the last 48 hours or so, and a sense of calm has returned. So I think several others have made this point. The institution is much bigger than particular individuals, and the arrival and departure of particular individuals should not be overemphasized. And just because the government makes certain suggestions on certain issues to the RBI, those should not be seen as an assault on the autonomy of RBI. On all these issues which are being debated, it's possible to have one particular point of view, and the opposite point of view is also legitimate. These are technical issues on which people can legitimately differ. So I don't know what this talk of bitterness and all that is all about. You have to accept then on a whole range of policy and technical issues, people will have divergent views.
Divergent views are welcome. I think differing ideology is welcome. I think some amount of tension is hardwired in this relationship. That is welcome. What is not welcome is that I know for a fact that the finance minister and the RBI governor were not in communication. I know for a fact that the RBI governor had stopped going to the finance ministry for that customary meeting, and that was not taken too kindly. So these are issues to ponder over. You can call it bitter, you can call it falling out and whatever, but the reality is this wasn't normal. This difference, this disagreement wasn't normal. But I think I've run out of time here on this edition of the India Development Debate. I can't thank this wonderful panel enough. Hemendra Hazare, Prabal Basu Roy, and of course Professor T.T. Ram Mohan, along with my consulting editor Maithili Busnurmat, for taking time out and speaking to us this evening. First day, first show, Shaktikanta Das says he will uphold the institution's autonomy and will preserve its independence. He will now have to walk the talk. For those who wonder him being a central government's man, remember, Urjit Patel was also this government's choice, until of course things became too hot to handle. On that note, thank you very much for being with us.